Hi everyone, it's Abby with the Bead Place and beadplace.net, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a cute 3D daisy chain ring. You could of course use this stitch to create a bracelet or whatever your heart desires, but today we're focusing on rings because we have kits to make rings. Check the link in the description below. Before we get started, please remember to like this video and subscribe if you'd like to see more. All right, let's get started. The materials that you'll need to create this ring are 3 different colors of size 11 seed beads. You'll have an accent color, a main petal color, and the center of the flower. You'll also need 2 beading needles. I am using 2 big eye needles because that's what comes in the kit and they're my favorite. You will also be using 8-pound fire line, which also comes in the kit. We're going to start by prepping your work surface. I like to work on a bead mat and lay my seed beads out in an order that I'm going to keep track of so I keep similar colors away from each other. Now, these are some beautiful colors that come in the kit. If you'd like to select your own colors, you can check out our store, beadplace.net, or come visit us in the St. Louis area. If you are using your own seed beads and stringing material, cut 36 inches of your fire line. Let's get started. So next what we're going to do is open our big eye needles. The needles open in the center of the needle, which makes threading a breeze. So we're going to actually be threading both sides of our needle, both sides of our thread. So I like to pull about 6 inches of the thread through and then move to the other side of the thread and do the same with the other needle. So that way we have one needle on each end of the thread. One long length of thread, but each side has a needle strung onto it. Before we get started, I like to check to make sure the ends or the tail ends of my thread are about equal, and then that way our work is centered on our stringing material. So your working thread in the middle should be a U shape and should always be longer than the tail ends. The tail ends should always be shorter so that they don't get caught in our work. Our first step is to put one needle in one hand and one needle in the other hand. The needle that's in my right hand is going to have 2 of the accent color beads strung onto it. For me, that's gold. So I'm going to string those 2 beads down to the very middle of my work. Then I'm going to pick up one of my petal color, for me that's purple, and I'm going to bring it slightly past my needle. Notice how my right hand needle is pointed off in this direction. I'm going to take my left hand needle in the opposite direction and go through the bead so that when we pull our needles out, what we see is that the threads are making an X through our bead. So you'll want to pull that petal color bead down to the very center of your work. And what we should have is a little triangle of beads. It's okay if it's not perfect at this point. We're going to kind of lock things in a little bit later, but you want to make sure to try to get as much of the tension out as you can. Now, as you work, if you're using smoke fire line, you may start to notice some dark lines on your fingers. That's perfectly normal. That's the colorant on the stringing material, but don't worry, that will come right off and it won't discolor your project. So we'll go back to having one needle in one hand and one needle in the other hand. Now the next step that we're going to do is we're going to pick up 2 of our petal colors on your right needle and 2 of the petal colors on your left needle. So just like that. And we are going to slide those all the way down to meet your work. So this is what we should have so far. We have 2 of the accent colors, we have 1 of the petal color in the middle, and then 2 and 2 of the petal colors. So next, what we're going to do is take our right hand needle, and we are going to pick up 1 of the center color and bring it slightly past our needle. Then what we're going to do is take the left hand needle through it in the same direction as our right hand needle. So opposite what we did before with our petal color. So notice how the needles are coming out of the same direction. And when we pull the bead down, we don't have an X, we have a straight line. So we're going to pull that down to meet our work. And then we should have this. 2 of our accent color, 1 petal color in the middle, 2 and 2 of our petal color, and then 1 of our center color with both of the threads coming out of it in the same direction. Now this next step that we're going to do is a little bit tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's going to be magic. So we're going to separate our threads, and we are going to take the right hand thread and go up through the 2 right hand petal beads. Don't pull tight yet. We're going to set our needle aside. We're going to take the left hand thread and we are going to go up through the 2 left hand petal beads. Now, be careful not to go underneath this thread. We want to go on top of that thread. So pull most of the slack out, but don't pull tight yet. So what we should have at this point is something that kind of looks like a bug with wings. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull tight, and you'll be able to see that center of the flower fall in the center of the flower. Isn't that cool? So now what we're going to do to finish the flower off with that final petal is we are going to pick up 1 center bead on your right needle, and you're going to take the left needle through it in the opposite direction. Opposite direction this time. So when we bring it past the needles and down onto the thread, we should have an X coming out of our bead with our thread. And so here's where we lock the tension in. And make sure at this step that you're pulling tight, because this is the step that kind of determines how tight that flower is going to be. And the tighter you pull at this step, the more dimensional the flower will be, with the center of the flower sitting on top of the flower rather than in between. All right, so our next step is to add our accent beads. So we're going to add 1 gold or 1 accent color to each needle. So 1 on the right, 1 on the left, and bring down to meet our work. And at this point in the project, it doesn't really matter if your right and left needles are switching back and forth. I'm just using that as a teaching guide to help you understand what needles are going where within each step. So don't worry if you've set your work down and you come back and you can't remember which needle is which. No big deal. But if you are struggling within the steps, One tip that one of our viewers shared with me was that she puts a dot of fingernail polish, a very thin dot of fingernail polish, on one of her needles, and that helps her remember which is which. So I thought that was a great tip. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is pick up one of our petal colors. And again, for me, that's purple. What we're going to do then is take the left needle through it in the opposite direction. And so when we bring our threads out, we have an X, and we'll bring that down to our thread. And when we pull it tight down to our work, we have this cute little four square, or diamond almost, of beads. Just like that. And try to keep your tension fairly even. For this particular project, it is a stitch that does stretch out a little bit, so when in doubt, pull tight rather than loose. So next, we'll take our right hand needle and we'll pick up two of our petal color, and our left hand needle and we'll pick up two of our petal color. And we will bring them down to your work. Just like that. And so here's the magic step. We are going to pick up one of the center flower on your right needle, and then bring it slightly past the needle and take the left needle through it in the same direction. So anytime we're using our accent flower color, our center flower color, we're taking the needles through in the same direction, and anytime we're doing the petal colors, they're going in opposite directions. So this is what we have so far. We've got one flower and one partial flower. We are going to separate our threads. All right. And we're going to take our right hand needle and go up through. And this time what I want you to see is I have my needle through the underside of this top thread. And what that's going to do is place the wings on the front. And I'll show you why we're paying attention to that in just a second. So again, left hand needle, but this time we're taking the needle under those wings. All right, so let me pull it tight and bring it in. So at this point, you can see that because we already have a flower on here, we need to be paying attention to which side we're placing this center bead. So what we did last time was, in my opinion, what's most comfortable, which is placing those needles on top of the wing thread. This time we're placing them underneath, and what that's going to do is make sure that this center flower bead gets placed on this side versus the back side. So you can choose what's most comfortable for you. I kind of do a mixture. If your work flips, you'll want to do the opposite. If your work is forward, just pay attention. That's how we're able to determine which side your center of the flower is going to go on. So I've got one of my petals on my right needle. I'm going to take my left needle through it, and because we're using a petal bead, we're going in the opposite direction, making that X. We're going to pull the bead down, and pull very tight. Work all that tension out. And sometimes what I like to do is pull the thread tight with my fingers like this while I'm wiggling my work a little bit to work out any inconsistencies in tension. And then we have 2 flowers. So next, I'm going to take my right needle and go through an accent bead. My left needle go through an accent bead. And that finalizes the 2 sections. All right, so at this point in time, we're gonna keep working in the same way. I'm gonna show you a couple more rounds quickly. And when you get to about 6 or 7 of these repeats, we're gonna have you check to make sure it's a good size for you. So again, I have one of my petal colors on my right needle. I'm gonna take my left needle through it in the opposite direction. And that's the petal that's going to start our flower. So I'm gonna bring that down to my work. And at this point, we should have, well, if I can pull my tension correctly and not tangle my threads, we should have a little diamond like this. And of course, when I pulled it, I pulled my flower off kilter. So now's that time for that little wiggle and pull trick. All right, so next we're going to separate our threads back into 2. We're gonna do 2 accent flowers on your right. I'm sorry, not accent flowers, petals. We're gonna do 2 petals on your left. And this is what we have. All right, it's magic trick time. We're gonna take one of our flower centers. We're gonna pull it slightly past our right needle. We're gonna bring our left needle up through it in the same direction. So anytime you've got that flower center gets the same direction. There we go. We're gonna separate our threads, and perfect. So you can see my flower petals are at the bottom. So I'm gonna take my needle on my right side up through the 2 right and above that thread right there. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side with my left. I'm gonna go up through and above the thread. So my wings are underneath the antennas, and that's gonna place that flower center whatever side those wings are on. So pull tight, and it's gonna feel open and weird at the top, and like you haven't done it correct so far, until we place that top petal. So we're gonna place the top petal by picking up 1 petal bead on your right needle. We're gonna bring it slightly past and then bring the left needle through it in the opposite direction, like that. So X, and we pull that X down to meet our little partial flower, and then it becomes a whole flower. Awesome. So we're gonna pull tight side to side to kind of anchor it in there, and then we're gonna close that section of flowers with our accent beads. So 1 gold on right, 1 gold on left, and bring it down. So again, we're going to pull tight to keep our tension even. And we're gonna start the next section with a petal. We're gonna bring the petal slightly past the right needle, bring the left needle through it in the opposite direction. Anytime we have that petal bead, we're going opposite with our needles to make an X. And bring down, and that makes our cute little diamond. Here's our opportunity to once again correct the tension, set any beads right, if we've got any weird loops anywhere, Give it a little push and wiggle. And how cute is that? So you can of course continue on with this stitch and make bracelets, necklaces, whatever you want. Today we're making a ring. So for me, it takes about 7 flowers, depending on your seed bead brand, depending on your tension, your stringing material. That number could vary. But when you get to about 6 flowers, you want to stop and kind of pull it around your finger. Remember, this is a stitch that kind of stretches out. So keep that in mind, error on the smaller side, and you will be happier. So we're going to continue on. Well, I'm going to continue on. And then when I get to the point where I'm going to turn it into a ring, I will stop and show you how to do that. All right, so I have my desired number of flowers here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to demonstrate how to connect it together into a ring. So I have stopped before putting my last petal on my flower. So my last step that I did was adding the center bead, and I'm to the point now where I'm going to add my center top petal. So I'm going to do this like normal. Of course, stringing it on my right needle and taking my left needle through it, bringing it down to meet my work. I'm going to adjust the tension so that it's even. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend my ring into a circle. And you see how we've started with those accent beads at the beginning. That's going to allow me to easily lock my design into place without you being able to see a start and a stop. So I'm taking my right thread, the thread that's coming out of the right side of my top petal bead, and I'm going to take it up through that accent bead on the right side. You can see what I'm doing here. And of course, this is not twisted. And my centers are on the outside of the band. Now I'm going to take my left thread, the thread coming out of the left side of my flower, and I'm going to bring it up through the left gold accent bead. And of course, when I tighten this, it looks like it's a part of the original design. And now what I'm going to do is take my thread on my right side and bring it through that next petal bead from right to left. And I'm going to pull it tight. And what that's going to do is it's going to correct the tension so that it is working like it's in the pattern. Now, what you could do if you are not confident with the tension of your knots is you could take this thread, your left thread, go around those 4 beads again, but you'll end up seeing a little bit of a bulk of thread at the end, which I don't like seeing. So I'm going to stop here. My threads are in the same place on my work. You can see my right thread is coming out of the purple petal. My left thread is coming out of the gold accent bead. So they are at a point where they're meeting each other. And that's important. You want to make sure your threads are at a point where they're meeting each other if you're going to tie a knot. Now you can see I have a lot of extra thread here. If you want, you can go in and reinforce this if it's something that you want to wear every day. I find that these are such a dainty, lightweight ring that they don't need much reinforcing, especially because we're using the 8-pound fire line, but it's up to you. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to remove my needles and tie a knot. If it's easier for you to tie a knot with your needles attached, that's fine. I don't like to do that because I don't want to risk stabbing myself with the needle. So the knot that we're going to tie is a square knot or a surgeon's knot, whatever your preference is. But just make sure it's a secure knot. So I'm doing right over left, and make sure that you are not looping over anything you shouldn't be, and pull tight. Before we do that next section, make sure you haven't pulled anything off kilter. I have not. So then we're going to do left over right. And then if you were wanting to do a surgeon's knot, you could go one more time around and pull tight. When in doubt, if you don't trust your knots, especially with fire line, if it's slick, you can tie a couple of knots. Totally up to you. And chances are these knots will tuck right into that next bead. But just make sure you don't do more than, let's say, 4 knots, because you don't want it to be visible. Now, if you have a thread zap or a thread burner, you could go ahead and use this at this point. I'm scared of those. I'm a metalsmith. I work with torches all the time, but thread zaps scare me. I realize I have nothing to be scared of, but I have an irrational fear of thread zaps. So this is what we have. Now what we're gonna do is take a thread snipper or a knot cutter, whatever you use to trim your threads. With fire line, give it a little bit of a pull. And there we go. You have an adorable beaded ring. Now keep in mind you can find kits at beadplace.net in a couple different color varieties, and then you can also choose your own colors as well. You can make bracelets, ankle bracelets, headbands, whatever you want. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps our channel out, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching.